Welcome to another show of Present Her, where we've been talking to ladies who have made the transition from playing the game at the highest level and actually going on to stay in touch with it in one form or another, but particularly through broadcasting, either radio, television, or both. Our guest today is someone who's, I don't know how to even begin to describe her to you, because she's not just multifaceted, she's multifaceted. Imagine being a specialist lawyer in a specific area of financial wrongdoing or fixing it, being an artist of no mean talent, a globetrotter right from the time she was very young, playing for both England in terms of representing the country and for the Netherlands. Welcome, Isabelle Westbury.
I think you've given me far too much of an introduction. I think I'm more what I'd call a Jill of all trades. I've got lots of fingers and lots of different pies. It doesn't mean I excel in all of them.
No, it's a pleasure to have you, Izzy, and I know you've been very busy with lots of stuff. So thank you for finding the time. I know your weekends are very precious, but thank you for pulling an hour out for us. We appreciate it very much.
Oh, it's a privilege to be here, Prakash. It really is.
Terrific. So let's, like that Sound of Music song goes, I think a good place to start is at the beginning, isn't it? So let's do that. And tell all our viewers how your geologist father's movements around the world took you to places that not too many people would count as having visited in an entire lifetime. And you did that all before you got into your teens.
Well, I think also what stood out and what's quite sort of funny being here on a cricket program is that all of the countries which we lived in my early years are not what you would call cricket playing nations, perhaps, or at least not much of it. I was born when my parents just moved from the Ivory Coast to Malaysia, to Sarawak, and then we went from there to the north of the Netherlands, where there's lots of Frisian cows and not much else. And then we went to Syria, to Damascus for 4 years, which is a wonderful experience. But as you can imagine, not much cricket in any of those places really. And it was only when I must have been 12 when we came back. I say back at least to Western Europe, so near to our home country of England. We came to live in The Hague in the Netherlands, and that's when I first got introduced to cricket, aged 12, I guess. But yes, a very sort of nomadic childhood beforehand.
Yes, but those experiences, you were obviously very young and growing up, but outside the cricket aspect of it, they must have sort of left a very deep and interesting and diverse imprint on your mind about just life in those countries and the way people went about their daily chores, what their values were, what mattered and didn't matter. Of course, it was a much more peaceful world at the time too.
Yes, I mean, it goes without saying, I think, that when you're a child, you don't know anything different. So to me, it wasn't unusual. I mean, I remember coming home to England. We always used to come home for Easter or for Christmas to see our family, and other children being kind of like, oh, does this mean that you come from those places? Are you Arabic? No, obviously not. But no, we were very lucky. I think it was a time when I guess the expat world, my mother didn't need to work, so it was very easy for her to go and sort of take the family to where my father was. We lived, a privileged life, I think, going around the world, but also being very much absorbed in the culture. I think my parents have always, it's part of the reason why they wanted to travel and live in these different cultures was not to go and live in a sort of shut up camps somewhere, which can happen. We lived in the heart of Damascus. I think that's got a very vivid memory. We lived there at a time, as you say, when the world was, or at least that part of the world, was a much nicer place. From 98 to 2002, that I hope it was very multicultural. I mean, it's for hundreds of years was once a centre of civilization. I think we felt we got the last of it in a very welcoming and very free society. I guess now I'm sitting here when the Civil War's been going on there for almost a decade, and I think that I was just extremely lucky to have been there at a time when it was such an amazing place.
So coming to The Hague, where you moved back after these early travels, if I'm not mistaken, reading somewhere that it was football's loss that you actually went into cricket. Tell us about that part.
I think that's one of the wonderful things when you leave one game and pick another when you're early enough to have. I can say that I was going to become the best footballer there ever was, but the truth is I probably wasn't. I had a good left foot, but that was about it. No, football was my first love, and I think that kind of represented my childhood around the world, where football is perhaps more of a widely global game. I loved it. I was infatuated by Alan Shearer of Newcastle United, and Ajax as well at the time. And I loved football. I played it a lot. I played with the boys. I didn't really think it was odd that I was the only girl. Quite often I just wanted to play sport, but it was unfortunately at a time when I was about 12, 13, when the club, according to the national governing body rules, I wasn't allowed to play football as a girl in a boys' team beyond the age of 13. And the club sort of just reluctantly sort of said that's the way it is. There was nothing they could do about it. It was the rules and regulations at the time. I think they've changed. But I could no longer play football at that local club, and I think the nearest women's club was quite far away, and my parents weren't particularly happy about me having to go and play there. I don't think there was a junior team. It would have been a senior team when I was 12 or 13. And so the club sort of said, well, we have got a cricket section in the summer, and there are no rules about girls playing in boys' teams. So why don't you play cricket? And that's pretty much what I did, because I just wanted to play. I wanted to play sport. And so I went from being the only girl in the boys' football team to being the only girl in the boys' cricket team. And I absolutely loved it.
And was that something that sort of just came naturally to you? Did you just take to it very, very effortlessly in terms of, the whole setup of rules? And obviously you'd followed or seen cricket, that's a given. But in terms of playing it and playing it at even a club level, was that something very easy for you? Just came to you, or did you have to work on it?
I feel at that age, just before you reach your teens, I think you're either, if you're sporty, you can kind of turn your hand to most sports, and if you've got a good eye for the ball, and I obviously had some kind of coordination, and I was reasonably athletic. I think it all happened. Well, I don't know. You haven't seen how fast I run these days. It's quite hard to go back. I think it was quite a late entry into the game. I mean, I played, I guess, a bit of beach cricket when I used to come back for summer holidays to England, but that was it. I must have been terrible technically, but I was reasonably tall, reasonably athletic, and just wanted to play and do well, and I threw myself into it. I mean, I don't think I started in the sort of third team of the under 13s, and then got to the sort of the first team in the next year. And yeah, I think I was just lucky. And I think the other thing to say is that Holland or the Netherlands, even though it's obviously quite a small cricketing country, I think if you are able to get into one of the clubs, they've got a very robust infrastructure. They've got good support. They quite often get a lot of South Africans come over in their winter to play in the Netherlands, because you've got quite a similar language in the Afrikaans and the Dutch language. There's very strong bonds there. I think we had Andre Adams actually as one of our coaches at one point. Neil Mackenzie came and coached us. I mean, at that point, I had no idea who he was, really, apart from that he had a supermodel wife, which everybody at the club seemed to be very, very happy about when she came over. But otherwise, so we had some very good coaching set up. And so you had quite a sort of, because it was such a small cricketing world, if you were in it, you had very often, you had the privilege of having a one-to-one with Neil Mackenzie. I mean, that's absurd thinking about it.
But to your point about starting with club cricket and moving up, you obviously made it. You were a lot better than what you're letting on, because you made it into the Dutch team for the European Championship, if I remember right. And while we won't go into the statistics and strike on averages and number of wickets per 100 balls or whatever, we won't do that. But the fact is, you did make it to the national team, and you represented the country, which at the time clearly wasn't a cricketing powerhouse, wasn't probably something that in the women's game was a very strong nation. but it gave you and all those who played with you, I suppose, the belief that you could go on and perform at the highest level in women's cricket, didn't it?
Sorry, I think you're probably right about not going into the statistics, because it was certainly a baptism by fire. It was, I mean, it's definitely fair to say that the women's cricket within the Netherlands was very small. I mean, I played exclusively with boys at the club level. I didn't really know that women's cricket really existed until this sort of, I found out there was a women's cricket team that represented the Netherlands. And I thought, well, okay, this is quite a good way to play. If I want to go and play internationally, I need to start playing with women. And I also knew at that point they're playing in the European Championships, and I had a British passport. I am English by birth. My parents are very English, and I kind of thought, well, if I am good enough, I had no idea, obviously, very little to go on, then I'll play for Holland and see how good this English lot are. Turns out pretty good. At least compared to me at the time as a 15-year-old whippersnapper who thought that I was bee's knees. And yeah, it was a sort of, right, if I still think I can get on from there, that's when I need to think about going back to England at some point. But, you know, when you're 15, 16, you think you can rule the world. And certainly I did. And certainly I found out that there's a lot of other very good athletes out there. I remember playing against a sort of, 15-year-old Holly Colvin and Sarah Taylor. And oh my goodness, I actually have vivid memories of playing against Holly Colvin in the 2005 European Under-21 Championships. It must have been I don't know if she'd already played the Ashes at that point and was about to go and play the Ashes in that summer. I remember thinking, oh, I'm the same age as you. I'm going to skip down the track and smack you over your head. Oh, wait, I've been stumped.
Yes.
So yes, it was an eye-opener. But, you know, I think it's fair to say that throughout my career, I was more competitive than I was talented. So
that's a huge quality, right? And there are so many sportsmen and athletes around the world who may not naturally have been as gifted as some others, and who've used mental strength, things like being competitive, just being smart about it. And in that context, how did you sort of make those transitions? Because those continued through the time when you came back to England, then started playing in the county championship, moved from Somerset initially, then to Middlesex, captain Middlesex, all those moves. I think somewhere along the way, wicket keeping sort of took a back seat. But you did begin as a wicket keeper. So how did that happen? Was it just that they didn't have anybody who was willing to goal keep behind the stop?
It really was that. I mean, that was the stage of women's cricket. It was very much like if you were athletic and had a good eye for the ball, which was kind of what the qualities I possessed. And I think if you go back and look at some of the, and I'm not comparing myself to them at all because I was nowhere near their level, but if you look at some of the real all-rounders of my kind of cohort, you're looking at your Nat Sivers and your Elise Perrys. And I think something that's consistent through their careers is they started off playing a lot of sports when they were younger. I mean, Elise Perry famously for football. I actually went to the same school as Nat Siver in the Netherlands. We went to the British school in the Netherlands in The Hague. She was 2 years younger than me. And I remember being very put out by her because I previously had been the best girls footballer at the school. And suddenly this little whippersnapper comes along. Who's this Natalie Siver girl? And she was brilliant at all sports. You know, she was amazing. I mean, I hated her for the first few years because she was better. And I think that we just played every sport that you could. I mean, I remember being very upset that the girls couldn't play on the boys rugby team, for example, at the age of 13, 14. But we played cricket, tennis, hockey, football. I think I did, cross-country running, that kind of everything that you could, you played, and it was encouraged. And I think this is something that we have got to be careful in this increasingly professionalized era, is that we don't deny that opportunity for athletes to become true all-rounders first and cricketers second, because that's how you find your Sivers, your Perrys. You give them that freedom to enjoy their sport, to choose what they think they're naturally good at. And cricket is unique in offering that all-round kind of role. And I was an all-rounder, not to the same pedigree, but that's why I was able to wicket keep, because it was literally, we haven't got a keeper. And I was like, well, I like catching. And at that point, I think I'd realised that despite being reasonably tall, I kind of ran in like pretty fast and bowled a little bit slower than you might expect. That perhaps a career in fast bowling wasn't my calling. So I just, I wanted to get involved.
When you did come back to England and started playing there, was it just that there was your role as a sort of spinner who batted or a batter again that was prompted by the circumstance of the team or the balance of the side, or was it just something that you liked more or liked less or were better at or otherwise?
I think it just reflects the fact that I, in every team I guess I played in a representative level, or when I was a reasonable athlete, but it was a struggle to get into the county setup, it was a struggle to get into the next levels, England, etc. So I guess trying to look at what areas I necessarily hold my place in the team by being a batter alone. I obviously was not quite the fast ball I wanted to be, and at that point I think we had a keeper, Sophie Le Marchand, who was in the England Academy, so that wasn't going to happen. So it was a sort of a case of I came over to go to university and played for Somerset at the same time. I was the overseas, you won't believe it from my accent, but I was the overseas player for Somerset for 2 seasons at the same time as Justin Langer was. So I like to consider myself the equivalent of Justin Langer when I was over at Somerset. But it was very much a case of just trying to find a way to be picked, I guess.
Let's move on to figuring out how you then sort of balanced or chose to balance the writing for the Telegraph, the other op-ed pieces and stuff that you do, your legal profession. I know you took a call at one point in time, I suppose, to say that I'm not going to do this full time because that might be all consuming again for you, given what little one understands about lawyers and legal profession, and then the broadcasting piece, and intermittently these amazing pieces of artworks that you come up with. Where did that come from into this whole mix?
Well, I
just find it fascinating.
Yeah, I think going to university, I was always imbued with a sense of profession, I guess. I think like all sort of expectant parents who have somebody who's, I guess, reasonably academic, I think I had pretty much the choice of medicine or law. And I'm sure that many children can probably relate to this around the world. And I think, I was interested in the way in which society works more than I was interested in the way in which the body works. So hence went down the law path. And I think I've never thought of law as sort of a backup to journalism and writing and the broadcasting. I've always thought of it as a sort of necessary complement. So I pursued it at university. I pursued it as a postgraduate degree, and I thought it was always quite a nice way to play cricket alongside it. At that point, I was playing Middlesex. The Kia Super League had just started. So professionalism was eking in, and it worked. It kind of worked as a student. I think it got a little bit more difficult, perhaps, when I actually had to start professionally as a lawyer. And I think I knew that I had to work a few years full time as a lawyer to kind of find your area and to show that you're serious. But actually, since that time, I've managed to go part time. We live in a much more flexible world. I took that opportunity almost as soon as I could, I guess, because you make a sacrifice of perhaps career progression, but equally it meant that I could carry on writing and broadcasting, and honestly, it's something that I've done since university. I started writing for my student paper. Honestly, I never thought of writing as a profession, mainly because I think it's such a unstable world, to be entirely honest. I mean, I think this was something that was really instilled in me from quite early. If you're going to be a journalist, I mean, good luck in a way. And I think that persists. Perhaps it's even got even more so now in the COVID world. Of it's an unsecure world. It is difficult. And in a way, I'm lucky. I've got that stability, I guess, of law. I never thought of it as a sort of backstop stability, but it is nice to be able to really pursue my journalism sort of from a position of passion, and you know, I write about things that I want to, and I broadcast on games that I want to. I don't have to do things that I guess I don't want to do, which you can turn things down, which perhaps isn't the sort of wisest career move all the time, but it means, yeah, you retain that passion, I guess, and that's the way I've operated. I've done the bulk of the law work in the winter, and then managed to work it around the summer.
Let's just move track a little, Izzy, and come to your trip to India when you came with Henry Moran and the others to broadcast for BBC Test Match Special, and in particular, interested in you talking to our viewers about both your experience overall, but particularly the train journey that we talked about a lot when we got together in Mumbai, from Mumbai to Assam, to Guwahati, and that long trip that you took, the amazing pictures that you put out. How did you see that? Did that sort of bring back some memories of early childhood in different parts of the world? Did that worry you at any point in time? Did you feel unsafe? Were you overjoyed? Did you get the famous English belly? I mean, I could ask you 100 questions just on that trip. So talk to us about that, please.
I could talk to you for 100 hours just on that trip. Honestly, I think that's one of the best things I've ever done. And I have to be careful because it was a bit cheeky. I was out there with the BBC, and we were covering 3 ODIs in Mumbai. So yeah, obviously right on the west coast, and then we were covering three T20s up in Guwahati in Assam, and you know, I think when it was announced, my geography of India was kind of okay. I knew where the major cities were, but I didn't realise how far away and how close to kind of Bhutan and sort of going in towards Burma that Assam is. And we knew that we had 3 days, I think it was, between the last ODI and the first T20. And of course, you know, with the BBC, I was there as an employee, and they had a sort of security assessment, and they had everything planned out, etc. And yeah, it was just sort of, we were very lucky because our scorer or statistician, Phil, he sort of said, he was there freelancing, and he said, I'm going to go by train, because he wasn't actually working for the BBC. And I just thought, I said, you know, first of all, the question was, how are you going to do that? I mean, are you going to have enough time to do that? And he's like, no, I've planned it all out. I'll go from Mumbai to Kolkata, and then up over to Assam. And I was like, and that little seed just planted. And that was it, kind of. I think the biggest thing was trying to persuade the BBC that I was allowed to go and do that. And I remember my parents were very angry because, you know, I was supposed to be there working, and this is a sort of, you can't go off on this free little jaunt of your own. But I also felt that when was I ever going to have that opportunity where I needed to be in one place and needed to get to the other? And if I wanted to, I could do it by sort of absorbing the whole of India in one go. So it sort of culminated in us maybe 3 days before the end of that last ODI, when we still hadn't booked our train tickets because I wasn't sure if I was allowed to go. And it therefore meant that you got one leg from Mumbai to Kolkata. We managed to get a seat. There's only a certain amount of, I think, tickets for international travellers.
That's right.
In, I think, second class with an aircon, which I was, you know, it just comes from a position of privilege, of course. But, you know, I knew nothing of the Indian train system apart from that it was huge, and that there was many, many different classes. But it meant that to get international tickets for the second leg, there was nothing, I think, except the sleeper class. I think when I mentioned this to my colleagues, they're a bit like, "Oh, are you sure?" And I said, I didn't really know that much, apart from it was unreserved and a bit more colourful, perhaps. And we said, "Yeah, let's do it." And you know what? I'm really happy. I'm really glad I did, because, you know, I do live, I guess, a privileged Western sort of middle class life. You don't always get to kind of immerse yourself in into a culture like that. And it took, it was a 30-hour trip overall. Can't say I slept all that much, but the people I talked to, the noises you hear, not everybody spoke English, of course, but the scenes that you pass, I honestly, if anyone ever visiting India gets to do a lengthy train trip, I couldn't recommend it more. And, I feel so lucky, the fact that hopefully in the future, my sort of covering of cricket will bring me back again and again and again to India, because there's so much to explore about it. In fact, the first time I went out to India was in 2009 when I was playing in the England Academy. 2009-10, yeah. And we had a training camp at the Chinnaswamy Stadium with, and this was at a time when the IPL was, just starting up, and RCB were there, and I think the cheerleaders were staying in the same hotel as us. And the ECB had got us tickets as sort of guests, I guess, of RCB to go and watch some of their matches. But on the night before we left, there was a game there, and they hadn't arranged any tickets. So I managed to, with a couple of players, to get some tickets just to go into the stands. And then, you don't feel it, yeah, you don't think about it necessarily. And I really am aware of I like to think I'm aware of that privilege, that kind of, not necessarily understanding what normal life is like to millions of people across the world, but to see the way in which cricket was not only watched but celebrated. It's such a part of life, and we don't have that as much in the West, and I think it's our loss, certainly. And I felt it. I really did. And I think the same with the train. There's a lot of poverty around the world, but there's a lot of hope as well. And human characters is a lot of resolve, a lot of sort of stubbornness, and you saw some of that. And a lot of hospitality as well. People sharing food the whole time. I did eat everything, and I think that came back to bite me a little bit, because maybe I got a little bit too arrogant. And after I'd been in India for 10 days and had not had a stomach upset, it was like, oh, I can go and eat everything. And I think I must have picked out something in a street stall at some point, which didn't quite agree with me. But I wouldn't change that either, because within reason, you've got to try.
Part of the experience, yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Let's move now to the aspect of broadcasting and commentary. Your opportunities, as you said, came along. You took them. When you started commentating, did you face any early challenges in terms of sort of stepping into what some would argue at the given time may have been a male-dominated space? We've talked about this to several people, of course. And I know that mindsets are outwardly changing, for sure. Some are genuinely changing. But there still are those challenges that may remain. Did you face any difficulties? And if you did, how did you sort of go about sorting them out for yourself, both from a professional delivery of what you had to do perspective, and, if I may, put people in place if they had to be?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky, because I started broadcasting with the BBC in 2015, and I started on the county championship circuit, so it was local radio. And I would say 100% that there was no outward sexism. It was more a sort of, not so much bewilderment, but maybe a little bit of surprise. It's like, I think it was, who are you, and how do you know what you're talking about? And you know what, that was probably fine, because I think if I'd been in someone's shoes who'd been broadcasting for the BBC for 15 years and never seen a woman on the circuit, you might also think, oh, this is quite different. And everybody was very welcoming. I think, again, a bit bewildered perhaps. How do I know about the game? And you know what? It's just you just start. You start talking, because people realize pretty quickly whether you know what you're talking about or not.
Of course.
But I do think that I was in a privileged position of being, I think I'd almost be what you'd term the sort of, I don't want to be too rude to the likes of sort of Ali Mitchell or Eleanor Aldroyd, but I'm the second generation.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so I think someone like Ali, someone like Ellie, they were the first. They were the first woman to do TMS. They had to pave that way. And I think I'm very aware of how much my generation, who started maybe 10, 15 years after them, owes that generation, because we were given a freedom that they didn't have. You know, Ali and Ellie, they knew that if they made a mistake, then somebody was going to say, women as a whole don't know what they're talking about. So they had to be so meticulous in their research, had to be so, like, not just professional, but not ever step a foot out of line. And whereas that's not my style. I do a lot of research, but I'm quite, I like going with the flow. I like to be able to just sort of, to be a bit more, I don't know, all over the place a little bit. That's my style. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I'd come in 15 years before. But because I was standing on the shoulders of the people like Ali, I was given that freedom to be able to just go on a little journey of my own, to talk about whatever, whether it was, you know, it's one of the beauties of cricket. You can talk about everything else as well as cricket. And I truly believe that we will reach equality when we have commentators, writers, leaders who can be bumbling, sort of endearing, the guises of your Boris Johnsons, even your Henry Blofelds, right? That kind of person, but as a woman. When you can have a woman that can do that, and instead of people saying she's made a mistake, therefore all women are terrible, it's part of their charm. It's part of the package. And I think I came in at the right time. I think, it was less sexism, more sort of surprise that I was greeted with. But I had people that had gone before me, and therefore I could just get going.
No question. Of course, both Ali and Eleanor are just unbelievably kind and capable and superbly competent people who've done such service. In fact, the phrase that you used, if I made a mistake in those days, could I then be sort of made the poster girl in the negative sense for all women? That's exactly what Melanie Jones said on this program. To say that, I had to be that cautious to make sure. The other aspect that I wanted to just get your sense from you on, Izzy, was about this whole nomenclature in the game, right? I mean, we all know that, traditionally, a batsman was the phrase. Batter came later. Third man versus third. Where do you stand? Not necessarily from a gender perspective, because I think sometimes one can confuse issues. But I just like to understand from you, your personal view on what is okay and what is not okay.
I think that's such a difficult question, and I've really struggled with it, to be honest, because whose right is it to judge what's okay and what's not okay? I think the short answer is that what's okay to one person might not be okay to another person, and I think we have to come to the common ground. For if something's not okay for somebody or thinking they're uncomfortable, then you don't say it. And I think that's where I've come to with batsman and batter, is that all throughout my playing career, all throughout growing up, and I talked about when I was young and enjoyed playing with the boys, being a girl, I was a batsman, and I was quite strong about that. I'm a batsman. Why do you call me anything else? And this goes back to my sister, whereas I think for someone like her and for some other girls, they would have seen batsman and they would have seen a man and not a woman after that sort of that bat, and it's not for them. For me, personally, it made no difference whatsoever. I just wanted to play. I wanted to almost be one of the boys. So that was kind of part of it. But actually, if it means that excludes one more person from the game, that's one person too many. And therefore, I have come round to calling people batters. Yeah. And I actually spoke as well recently. I was doing an article with female camera operators in the broadcasting part of the game. And it is now, the term is now camera operator, because at first a lot of women were quite, wanted to be called cameramen, but every time they called themselves a cameraman, someone would go, but you're not a man. And then suddenly you're a camera woman, but there's very few camera women. So you're part of a minority, you're not part of the group, you're kind of already excluded.
Separate.
Separate. And then the difficulty that you come to now is that a lot of men just don't want to be called camera operators or don't want to be called batters. And so this is what I think is important, is that there's one term for everybody, because we are all in this together. In the pursuit of gender equality, men are just as important as women in joining the conversation. I mean, Women's Cricket Zone, I think, is a perfect example of this, is that this is not a them and an us situation.
No, it shouldn't be. No.
We are all doing this together. And so when I commentate, when I write, I try to say batter. I don't always get it right, because, to be honest, I grew up saying batsman. And we all have our sort of our subconscious biases, our prejudices, just as much as the next person. And I did find it hard at first. I mean, first of all, I was like, oh, batter, that's what I fry my fish in, ha ha ha. But that's a ridiculous argument. If that's your only argument, then
that's no argument.
Absolutely. And I think just because you don't like the sound of it, or because it's different to what you grew up with, I think it's about understanding how to include as many people in this wonderful sport.
As we sort of wind down towards the end, we could keep talking for as long as we possibly have the energy to. In terms of the emergence and the widening of the women's game now around the world, right? And there are countries in Latin America where the women's game's seriously being played well. I know Chile, for example, Brazil. We just talked about Sweden. When I was working in China, I know how much the Chinese girls were playing cricket in schools. Of course, in Thailand, and they're making it to the World Cup, was another fantastic moment for women's cricket. What would you say to young girls in different parts of the world where maybe cricket is not yet sort of front and center, even Central Europe for that matter, Austria, Germany? What do you think can be done without sort of pushing it up to the ICC? Because that's the easiest thing to do, right? You say, oh, somebody else solved the problem. What could be 2 or 3 things that maybe organizations like ourselves, people like yourselves, could come together and try and do, which would enable the women's game to be more inclusive, to be wider, and therefore make it richer?
I think it goes back to that inclusion we've talked about all throughout this, is that you kind of have to look at models that have been successful, and the most successful sport, I guess, in the world is football. And part of that success is the strength of the domestic structures. The top level football nowadays, in women's and in men's, arguably, maybe women's is not a little bit further behind, but is through the club structures, because you can get people playing for some of the best clubs in the world that come from the most obscure parts of the world. And I think the same can be said for cricket, is that whether you're a woman picking up a bat in Nepal or in Austria or in Australia, you can still now, or it was starting, you can play in the top domestic leagues. And I think that is the challenge for women's cricket now, is to create these strong domestic leagues where women from anywhere can aspire to play as professional cricketers. I think, of course, the international game is very important, and I think it forms obviously a huge part of a sport's makeup. But actually, the one that's going to sort of widen the net is the one that says anybody can make it here. Yeah. If you are a woman from Nepal, you're probably not going to play in a World Cup final. But my goodness, you could play on the BBL world stage. Yeah. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see that in the BBL. We're starting to see that in, I guess, the 100 for women's cricket in England. The IPL, once that gets worked out as well, I think is a huge opportunity. I think the struggle for any sport is you have competing interests, because every national cricket board wants to develop their own players, because you have your aims when it comes to the international game, of course. But I think that's where the ICC does need to help in the setup of these domestic structures, just as well as the international game. And I think it's so important now. even more so with COVID, because we are unfortunately, I think, seeing the next big hurdle for the women's game is seeing sort of boards have more autonomy, which is good in many ways, but it also means that only those with the appetite to grow women's cricket will do so. And so you are starting to see this gap, I guess. We saw it with, take England women this summer, for example. You know, I've been, the turnaround in the attitude of the England and Wales Cricket Board, in my mind, has been very quick and really heartening. It's suddenly in a few years they've realised that women's cricket is not just something that they need to grow because it's good to do. They've realised that actually to get sponsorship, to get participation, if they want to have a sustainable business model in the next 10, 15 years, why would you exclude half of your population? They've realised that they are so important to women's cricket, but women's cricket is so important to them. And therefore this summer, they said, and they've put their money where their mouth is, that they were going to build biosecure bubbles the same as for the women as for the men. They got to a point where it was out of their control that other countries were dropping out, when the men were going to have a full international summer. And I think that's what we need to see, is we need to see the appetite from other nations, as well as some guidance from the ICC in working together to develop global cricket. So I've kind of gone off in convoluted ways. I think for an individual, the domestic structure is so important, but I think the ICC it's not just about money, it's about guidance. It's about setting that path as well. And I think we're at a very interesting juncture, because I think it's simultaneously extremely exciting, the potential for women's cricket around the world. It can almost go into places that men's cricket hasn't. You talk about Thailand. I mean, I don't think, maybe it's my ignorance, but I haven't heard much about Thailand and men's teams. So why can't women's teams thrive where men's teams haven't? You can reach areas that were before unreachable, so to speak. So yeah, we're at a really interesting juncture where it's exciting, there's a lot of potential, but equally it's very easy to regress decades as well. And especially when boards around the world will be losing lots of money. You know, you chop off the easy things to chop off, I guess. And I think it's very important women's cricket isn't, because that to me would be very short-termist. If you want to profit from cricket, I'm talking from a purely financial sense, don't exclude half of those people who will be funneling money into it. It's
fabulous. That's just superbly put, and I think put down like the closing argument in a case that you're absolutely going to win. There's no way, excuse me, no way the judge can rule any other way, Izzy. That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to bring the formal conversation for this afternoon to an end, only because I've got to make sure that I don't sort of go beyond Yash's time frame. I could sit and talk to you for hours together. So thank you once again for your time, for your candor, and for sharing your personal journey, as well as some great insights into what goes through a person's mindset as he or she makes the transitions from the playing field to other endeavors of life, including the commentary box or the typewriter, as the case may be. And in the end, some great recipes for anyone who's got anything to do with the game to look through and help encourage and widen the women's game. Thank you, Izzy, for your time.
Prakash, it's been an absolute privilege. And I say that from the bottom of my heart. It has been.
Thank you so much.